Okay. Um, Today's uh lecture, I'm going to introduce a really important resource for you. The reading and subject matter, the last chapter was about how to support struggling readers, and I thought I would take some more time with that. And over the next couple of weeks, kind of break down what that might look like. It's really hard, I know, in your different classrooms. You have enough content to cover, and we need to really be thinking about how we can support our students. And so while we're helping them to access our information, one of the things we want to be careful that we're doing is also helping them to build these reading skills so that they can get stronger and learn to access that information with less and less support. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to real quickly cover vocabulary only because I know we've already really covered this in class. So that'll be kind of a quick pass through, and then we'll start to look at some of the other recommendations in this practice guide that I'm going to share with you today, and that we're going to use for the rest of for a couple of weeks. Okay. So before I get into the practice guides and some of the strategies, what you want to think about is really we're talking about tier one supports. And what that means is tier one being the general classroom. What are the things that we can do for our students, knowing that many of our students are actually all the way up to needing tier three supports. So you might have in your health class, or you might have in your history class a student that has been identified and does have a pull out class where they work with an intervention specialist or reading specialist to try to work on some of these skills. But in the meantime, we know the nature of secondary education, the show goes on, right? And so what are the things that we can do in our regular education classrooms to support those readers? And honestly, how can we support maybe our readers that are also kind of on the bubble where they haven't been identified as having reading struggles, but are in fact, are in fact exhibiting signs of limited reading skill and could benefit as well from a lot of the practices. So it's not just that small group of students that you have that are in tier three. I bet you're going to find that a lot of these practices are going to support a lot of readers, a lot of your students. So before I do that, to kind of motivate you and to think about why this is in fact our role as high school teachers, one of the things I think it's important for us to consider is what it costs for us to have a sort of stagnant and entrenched population of people that we know are poor readers. And so one of the things I thought was interesting is I found this map here from the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, and it looks to see where in the United States, what percentage of the states have people that we would consider being of basic literacy, right? And so it's kind of cool. You can pull this up and you can look at your state, okay? But you can also look at this map and you could look at the different counties. And so when you have a teaching job, it's kind of cool because you can get a sense of where you're at, where your literacy map, I'm sorry, this is taking forever, so of course, right? Where they're at or below the state literacy levels. They look at some of the estimates for what our literacy levels. You can compare to another county. So what you can see here then is that we actually know one of the things that we certainly know about. Let me close this out. Sorry, let me get rid of this. Is that there's a high correlation, surprise, surprise, between low literacy rates, right, and poverty. And so a lot of times, one of the things, a lot of times I talk about our crisis in education is often really a crisis in childhood poverty, and we know that. But a lot of that is sort of because of the cyclical nature. So when I go through some of these costs of poor literacy rates, I want you to think about how much of this then creates like this generational cycle, right? Where because of the poverty that the illiteracy rates causes for the adults, the child then is born into and ends up duplicating that, right? So that's that, and disrupting that cycle is something that I think most of us in teaching and education are really passionate about. It's oftentimes why we've gone into education. And what is really important for us to recognize is we actually can do it. There's a lot of evidence that demonstrates that improving education outcomes improves life outcomes for our students. So, okay. So what are some of the statistics that kind of contribute to the cycle? Why do we see the cycle? What we know is that people with poor literacy skills are 2 times more likely to be unemployed. Okay, so think about that. So they're 2 times more likely to be unemployed, which means that their children are going to be twice as likely to be living on public assistance, suffering from student food or shelter insecurity, things like that. Illiterate workers earn 30 to 42% less than their literate counterparts. 60–80% of the prison population read and write below basic levels. In the juvenile system, that number is estimated to be 85%. Individuals with lower levels of literacy skills are more likely to report poor health. So these are what this shows is the literacy rates also affect the quality of life. So it's not just about whether or not we can get our kids through our class. We want to be committed because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is prepare our students for life, right? And their outcomes in life are going to be so much richer if we have given them access to strong, high quality literacy instruction. So estimate around 70% of incarcerated people can't read above a 4th grade level. There's a lot of factors that go into how a state plans out or considers what their prison population needs might be. But part of that equation in many states is actually looking at the 3rd and 4th grade proficiency rates, their state testing. And it kind of is, unfortunately, a strong indicator of how many people they will expect to move through the system at a very reduced literacy rate. What does that mean, though? Right? At the end of the day, that means that we as a country suffer somewhere around $300 billion a year in lost business productivity, earnings, needing to create welfare, crime, and then the cost of crime, both the crime itself and then the justice system and the prison system that it necessitates, health and social justice problems. So we know this is a costly problem that we have, one that our schools, if only we could spend this money on our schools, right? Maybe we could fix it, but that's a different lecture for a different group too, because I'm sure you would all agree. But what we need to recognize is that this is a costly problem and we have a role to play. As teachers, we've elected to take on a leadership role and an advocacy role that will hopefully help us to address these problems. In Ohio, specifically, we know that literacy rates, right, especially adolescent literacy rates, that these are something that we need to work on, that we are not, as a state, there's a lot of really interesting initiatives to try to move the needle, if you will. The state has a document called Ohio's Plan to Raise Literacy Achievement. This document has been updated, and actually a new updated version of it will come out soon. But since 2018, the state of Ohio has prioritized literacy achievement in its education policies and practices. And I think that's really something that is commendable and important for us to recognize as teachers in a public schools, in a teacher prep program within the state. So here is from this document. Based on the relationship between Ohio's measures of literacy and graduation, we know that the struggles Ohio students face can have a profound effect on their futures. Among Ohio's 2018 high school graduates, 85% had earned diplomas after 4 years or on time. While this represents an improvement over time, it still means more than 20,000 students did not graduate on time or at all. And so the state has made this commitment, or this root cause analysis, that and commitment because of that, that has identified literacy and improved literacy outcomes as a way to address this this really significant and costly problem of graduation rates. We do know, and there are a lot of resources out there for teachers. I'm going to click onto one of the most important ones. This is called the What Works Clearinghouse, which is the Institute for Education Sciences. They hold this, and what they have is this this clearinghouse that gives us and it rates things on how effective a intervention might be. So in the What Works Clearinghouse, okay, you can look up at interventions and intervention programs. Here, let me see if I can get to, okay, search literacy. Okay. What Works level literacy intervention, teaching academic content in English. And what they do is give you a lot of intervention ideas. And so we're actually going to be using the What Works Clearinghouse. We're going to be using their study guide as the impetus for the next couple of weeks. So I just wanted to let you know that this is out there. I want to let you know that there are resources. They talk about specific programs, specific strategies, and it's all evidence-based. Things that get into there because they've been proven to be effective through experimental design studies. Okay, so, but what does it mean when we talk about the different literacy rates, and when we talk about teaching or reading at a 4th grade level versus where we want our students to be reading at? I thought this was interesting. I wanted to go through like the different levels of literacy, and you can think of literacy on a spectrum. So when we talk about illiteracy rates, very few people are actually what we would qualify as 100% illiterate, and generally those people very often probably have been raised outside of situations where they have contact with society, because we learn some environmental factors will kind of help us to learn to create some form of literacy. You probably have been around a child that can't read but passes the McDonald's, right? The Golden Arches, and will say, "I want to go get chicken McNuggets," right? That is exhibiting what we would call functional literacy. And when somebody is in that functional literacy state, they're able to locate and identify information in short, commonplace prose, okay? So they can read a sign, they can probably sign a check, they can do things like that. They identify information and follow written directions that are simple. They can use a directory. What room is, what office number am I looking for when I'm looking for my doctor? They might be able to read labels on food and on medicine products, and they can read simple books to their children. So functional literacy is the lowest level of literacy I guess illiteracy is the completely lowest, but people who are functionally literate, obviously these people are going to have very limited opportunities, right? Well, most of our students can get to, in Ohio, most of our students get to what we call basic literacy. So basic literacy are, and I have some books up here that I would say are books that somebody who's got basic literacy can access, although like something like Great Gatsby, we know that it's a complex text, even if the prose itself is simple. But basic literacy, they can write a letter, they can spell vocabulary words such as definite or calendar. But these people are intimidated by big words. They do know how to code switch, meaning they do know how to move into like a professional tone versus a personal tone, and they know some basic grammar and spelling words. They have some understanding of significant works of literature. They have notions of world geography, history, religion, and literature, and they can think critically about advertising, news reports, and books that are modern within 100 years. Generally, these kids can work at an 8th grade level. Now think about this. When you looked at the functional literacy versus the basic literacy, guess what? Their opportunities have opened up, you're right? They're probably not going to make it in a college, a 4-year college program, but they're going to be able to get some decent jobs. They're going to be able to function much more in society. They're going to be able to be informed voters, things like that. The next level we would call proficient literacy. And this is where we want our high school students to be. And it's okay if we can't get our high school students much past that. But this is where we want, because this is where they can get to complex text, complex information. They can read dense and lengthy text. They can have an increased understanding of rhetorical structures of text. They can identify, interpret, and evaluate complex text of multiple modalities. They can construct meaning across text, which is really important. They can synthesize information. They can compare and contrast information. These are the critical skills that we want. Think about all of this problem that we have in society about misinformation and disinformation online. Well, guess what? If you aren't able to kind of like compare and contrast the information, you're going to have a problem because you're not constructing meaning across text. If you don't see that, if you're not able to draw text to each other and bring them into conversation with each other, you're much more likely at risk of being tricked by a single text, right? So misinformation. They know how to disregard irrelevant information to get to the meat of what they need. They have sufficient general knowledge and fluency to be able to read and understand text for a general reader since 1900. They can write a well-structured essay, and they have basic background knowledge. Proficient literacy is where we want our students to be. And in the state of Ohio, about 40% of our students are proficient or advanced literacy. Think about how this opens up the possibility, not to say that all of our kids have to go to college, but it opens up the possibility for colleges and professional careers that maybe students at this level, right, would not be able to consider. So it's all about opening up doors and opportunities. The last level is probably going to be when you're dealing with students in some of the higher advanced coursework, certainly in like your AP coursework and CCP coursework and things like that. But these are the people that can read widely on many topics, deeply understand language is not static. They seek to verify truth. They understand how language is used to persuade. They can think critically, interpret speech and writing in context. They can search for, integrate, and access information across multiple dense texts. They can locate abstract information to problem solve, and they are the ones that go on to college. But very specifically, they tend to be the ones that go on to advanced degrees. So these are going to be, if your student tells you that they want to become a doctor, they want to become a psychologist, they want to go into speech language pathology, things like that, where you're going to really want them to be into that advanced literacy in order for them to be able to succeed. Otherwise, they might be going into a track that they're just not, they're setting themselves up for a lengthy failure that could be costly too. So what do we do? What can we do in the high school classroom? First of all, I want you to know it's not too late. Lots of studies show that intervention can make a difference no matter what. You'll hear this like, oh, it's too late, it's too late. There's nothing you can do by high school. Well, that's not true. Over the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time looking at this practice guide, okay? So this practice guide, as I talked about, comes from the What Works Clearinghouse, which is a wonderful resource for you. And within this practice guide, which is something that I highly encourage you to spend some time on, within this practice guide, we will explore the different recommendations that they have for how to deal with struggling older readers. Let me step back and tell you what this is rooted in. Since 2002, we've had the National Reading Panel had talked about the 5 pillars of early literacy. These are the things that our students need to move from the functional to basic to proficient literacy, right? They need phonemic awareness, which means that they need to be able to hear the different sounds of speech so that they can then move to phonics, which means that they can decode it, right? So we talked about that. Those are those early literacies. Fluency is their ability to do this rather quickly and effortlessly. So fluency is a nice bridge between the early literacy, the really word recognition, when you think back to that simple view of reading that we went through, and get us up to comprehension. And so fluency then is the ability for our students to be able to do these things automatically and seamlessly, effortlessly, right? And then the other pillars, which are the ones that we really tend to know that the students need a lot of help with on the adolescent side, are the vocabulary and the comprehension. Not to say that your students may not have problems with these other pillars, but on the tier 1 classroom, you're not going to be addressing phonemic awareness or phonics. Hopefully those students are getting help from a reading specialist or an intervention specialist. But we as general classroom teachers can really help with the last 3 pillars, and still meet our mandates as set out by our state learning standards. So what does the practice guide recommend? The practice guide has 5 recommendations. The first one is that teachers engage in explicit vocabulary instruction, which we'll review very quickly today, and then we'll go through the other ones a little bit more slowly. Direct and explicit comprehension strategies, that they provide opportunities for extended discussions of text meaning and interpretation, that they increase student motivation, and that they make available intensive and individualized interventions for struggling readers by trained specialists. Obviously, we don't have control over 5, right? In this age of funding challenges in schools, you may or may not have access to an intervention specialist. But one of the things as tier 1 teachers that we can think about is how we can engage in a more meaningful collaboration with those reading and intervention specialists who might be working with our students in more intensive ways, so that we are supporting what they're doing and helping them to fill the gap for our students, while also continuing to help our students to learn whatever content we're trying to teach. So 5 is really not in your realm. It's kind of more of a programmatic suggestion, but I think there are things that we can look at as tier 1 teachers that can help us to become better partners with those teachers. So let's take a minute and just look at this first one, direct explicit vocabulary instruction. What does that mean? One of the things that means is that no matter what classroom no matter what our content area, we want to dedicate time for explicit vocabulary instruction in regular classroom lessons. And so you did that vocabulary strategies lesson, right? Review. That's really important that you consider how to teach explicitly vocabulary as part of your regular daily lesson planning. Why is that important? Well, because one of the things we need to keep in mind is that it takes research suggests it takes about 17 exposures to a new word for us to be able to learn that new word. So if all we did was present a reading list, well, that becomes problematic, because really it's much better if our students are using that word multiple times. They're using it in writing, they're using it in discussions, and they're using it in an authentic context, because otherwise we're not able to get to those 17 exposures. And it also means that we have to be very careful and consider what words to teach, right? We don't want to teach everything. Some words we'll just share the meaning for our students so that they can get to the text quickly, access what the text is saying. So we want to work to give our students the tools to be able to attack new words themselves that they don't know. And so that's the role that morphology has. When we read about morphology, really it gives the students a very specific strategy that they can use. What is this word? I don't know this word. Oh, here, I can break it down. Let me see if I can figure out related words. And so that's something that we can certainly do and reinforce. Another thing we can do is give them access, allow them, you can give glossaries, you can give curated lists, or you can just let them use their phones sometimes when they're reading, and let them get onto dictionary.com. So allowing them to see that there are tools out there for them to use and encouraging them to use those tools. Oftentimes, I had a student that would ask me a question about, what a word meant. And instead of answering that question, which I would sometimes do because it's just easier and faster, I might say to them, why don't you look that word up? Because I think it's important that, I still find words that I don't know. So then I can use my phone, right? And just look it up. And so getting them that kind of habit of mind is important. Another thing we can do is teach them to break down multisyllabic words and use context clues to get to the meaning of a word. So breaking apart the word. Sometimes words are very, very long, but when we break it apart, we start to see the morphology, the roots and the suffixes and things like that. So really spending some time with our students on how to break down. I found this really great strategy here on how to teach students multisyllabic words. And I thought this was an interesting, just kind of shows you. You can't do this right for everyone. After you've identified the keywords, look them up in the dictionary to see how they are divided into syllables. Write the divided words on chart paper or poster board. At the beginning of a week or unit, point out the listed words to students and tell them to become a historian or scientist or mathematician, whatever. They will need to identify the important words of the subject quickly and accurately. As you run your hand or pointer under each new word, say it slowly once so the students can hear the various parts of the word, and then blend the parts together and say the word quickly. Practice the list together 1 or 2 more times, and then move your hand or pointer around the prompt to say the words with you. Provide a sheet of flashcards for each student with the syllabicated words on one side and the student-friendly definition of the word on the reverse. Review the words once or twice every day for both pronunciation and meaning. When you say the words in context of an explanation or a discussion, run your hand or pointer over the word to affix the sounds and the corresponding spelling firmly into the student's mind. Even bright students who may know the meanings of words can have problems. So say the parts of the words, say the parts fast, and make it a real word. I thought that was interesting because that was just something that I thought, well, heck, we can all do that, right? We can do that every time we have a long multisyllabic word. And then the last thing is to think carefully about the words that you need to teach and to teach those words. And so this is what I'm going to go back over. This is, what are the different words? So tier 1 words are words that we know our students don't need. We don't want to spend time on. Tier 2 words is where we can really make an impact. Those are high frequency words that students encounter across content areas and, tend to be more academic. And furthermore, what does furthermore mean? That's not something that you say in everyday language. The tier 3 words, we want to teach those very carefully, but when they're content specific and they're critical to whatever we're teaching, yeah, go ahead, spend time on those tier 3 words. And for a science class, that might be spending some time on Greek and Latin roots so that students can, start to make aqueduct, aquafina, like you can, I was gonna say aquafina. But you know what I mean? Maybe they, teach them what their bottled water says and why it says that, right? But anyways, that is something that you want to think about is what words to teach. So, okay, I'm going to keep going through the practice guide, but I think that's enough for today. And I'm going to stop sharing now and wish you all a good week. Have a good week, everybody.